Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for today's webinar on redetermination. We still have some people joining us, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So this is really the next step in the redetermination webinar process that we're doing here at the TJC. And this is really an advanced training for advocates who really help people enroll in coverage on a regular basis or help them with renewals. If that's not something that you do, that's okay as well. There's a lot of information here, and it'll be good background information for you, even if you don't help somebody apply. So anyway, we're glad that you joined us today. My name is Rob Watkins. I'm going to be the presenter and your host today. So go a little over about today's agenda. So first going to talk about kind of the legal requirements of redetermination. We're going to talk about the process, how verification requests work, the reconsideration period, that's that 90-day second chance. We'll talk about some special coverage options that are available for people that might be losing their coverage during redetermination. A few other odds and ends of things that people need to know, and then I will answer questions at the end. Please feel free to ask questions at any time. You do so by including them using the Q&A feature. Please try not to use the chat feature for that, but instead the Q&A for it. The other thing that I want to mention is there's going to be a little bit of overlap for those people who joined our initial webinar that we did last week. I'm going to focus this webinar on really the process, how it works, types of proof needed, and just really kind of how really to navigate, the process of the renewal. The first webinar, we touched on that briefly, but we spent more time talking about TennCare specific plan for redetermination this year, and then also ways that you could get involved with it. So this webinar is going to be just a little bit different. But like I said, it's going to focus primarily on the process. So we're going to get started with the legal requirements. So by federal law, states are required to redetermine Medicaid eligibility every 12 months. Also, if an enrollee is terminated for failing to comply, a second chance, basically 3 months to send in requested information. So this reconsideration period really only applies to those individuals who didn't return the packet initially or failed to respond with required documentation through a verification request in a timely manner. That's going to trigger that second chance or that opportunity they have to resubmit information. If they go through the renewal process and they're determined ineligible based on the information provided, that 90-day second chance doesn't apply. So just about every category of TennCare is going to be subject to renewal. If it's based, TennCare is based on an SSI cash payment, then the Social Security Administration really kind of does that redetermination renewal process. It's not something that TennCare does. But it's going to cover really just about everything. The modified adjusted gross income or the MAGI categories, that's the lion's share of the people that are on TennCare. So it's going to be pregnant women, kids, and adult caretaker relatives. It also is going to cover medically needy spend down, the CHIP program, and then all the disability related categories, the aged, blind, and disabled categories. So those are going to be also included in the redetermination process. So let's talk about some of the requirements. So first, the state is required to review information that it already has in its possession, like household, financial, and citizenship information. So if they have that from, a prior application, they have this information, they need to kind of take a look at that. And for example, if they have information on income from a SNAP roll, they're supposed to take a look at that already, and to a certain extent, pre-populate forms, which is really kind of the second thing that they're going to be required to do. Third, they need to give the enrollee a chance to update or send in any missing information. So a lot of times what will happen is, the TennCare sends out a packet, they're going to pre-populate that packet. And so really this renewal process is an opportunity for the enrollee to actually make changes or update that information. Fourth, they must provide assistance. They must adapt its process to reasonably accommodate the needs of individuals with disabilities. This ranges from people with cognitive impairments to people who are deaf or visually impaired who have other physical disabilities. Fifth, they're required to screen for eligibility across all open categories, including the insurance affordability programs. So for example, if someone was eligible, as a caretaker relative, and maybe they're no longer have a child living in a household that's a minor, it's not just simply TennCare looking at to see if they still qualify as a caretaker relative, but rather any open category of Medicaid they need to screen them for. And then if at the end of that process, they determine that the individual maybe isn't eligible for Medicaid, then they need to then forward that information on to the FFM. And so that's other insurance affordability programs. So in other words, would they qualify for tax credits that way? And lastly, they need to notify the enrollee of their decision. Okay, so once the renewal packet goes in, TennCare needs to tell them, okay, you're either enrolled or you're then terminated from the program, and indicate reasons why they're no longer eligible. Well, that's the requirements for the stay. The enrollee also has certain requirements. And I've got those listed here on the screen, but they must provide and keep updated contact information. That's why it's really important to notify TennCare of any change in address, or in this particular case, since we haven't done really the renewal process of redetermination for several years, it's really a good idea to check with TennCare to make sure that they have the enrollee's most updated contact information. That's going to be important because that's a requirement on the enrollee to do so. The fact that they send the packet out, if it goes to the last known address, but that's not where the enrollee is at, that really kind of gives TennCare the ability to really terminate them from the program. They also need to notify TennCare of any changes in the household size or income. So did the person get a raise? Was there a death or a birth in the family that would change the household size? They also need to respond timely to notices and comply with requests for additional information or documentation. So it's kind of the verification request that I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes. So as I said, a practice tip here is make sure TennCare has the correct contact information on file. Can't stress this enough. That's the one thing that you can do right now. That's what we've been advising people to do over the course of time. The fact that maybe redetermination is going to start up, it's still a reason to have people just make sure that TennCare has the right information, because not everybody is going to receive a packet all at once. And probably the easiest way to do that is to create an account on TennCare Connect, or log into an existing account and make sure that the contact information is up to date. So how often does renewal or redetermination, what is required there? Well, it's renewal, these are actually rolling renewals. It doesn't happen all at once, but rather it's spread out throughout the year. And per TennCare's plan that we talked about last week, no month is to exceed 1/9 of the total TennCare population. So what TennCare did in their plan to CMS was they spread this out over a period of time, so that not everybody's going to get a packet all at once. It wouldn't necessarily, or at least in theory, overwhelm the system. All right. And so that really makes this whole redetermination or renewal process a marathon as opposed to a sprint. Okay. So we've got to be in this for the long haul and to really kind of stick with it over the course of the next year. So a redetermination of eligibility occurs during the 12-month eligibility period, or when a reported change, whether from a data source or an individual, may affect eligibility. Okay, so for example, let's say somebody's on TennCare and maybe a child is born. That is something that they're going to want to notify TennCare of that. It might make them eligible for a better set of benefits. Maybe maybe they had a child that was on Covered Kids, and now with this new birth, the household size is large enough now that that child that was on to cover kids might now be eligible for TennCare. We know that TennCare has a more robust set of benefits than cover kids. So that's something, reason why you want to notify them of that. Same thing with income, any changes in income, whether they lose income or gain income, that's something that you want to make sure that the enrollee notifies TennCare about. Now, important thing, according to the rules, they have 10 days to report those changes, all right? So it's really important that they get that information in promptly. So initially, CMS was going to require states to complete the redetermination process within the first 6 months after the public health emergency ended. However, many states expressed concern over that time period because it was too short, and that would lead to problems in the future. So if you can imagine, if they made everybody renew within the first 6 months, then that meant subsequent renewals, if it's going to happen within a year, but all would probably make all those renewals in the outlying years compress into a 6-month period. Now, because of that, that's the reason why CMS said, okay, we're going to expand that out to a year, all right? So that's why the redetermination period is really a year as we come out of this public health emergency, all right? And as I said, the main reason is to allow for more even distribution of those renewal packets, and really more importantly, the state's ability to process those packets in a timely manner. So this was a slide that we shared last week of TennCare's plan, and this kind of shows the unwinding period, the month, and what they're estimating the number of renewal packets are going to be sent. So as we also mentioned last week, TennCare is looking really to reduce the rolls by nearly 500,000. So if you think about it over the course of the past 3 years, we've had approximately 300,000 people come onto the rolls that were on there pre-pandemic. And then if you figure over the course of time, approximately about 200,000 people will come onto the program, about 100,000 a year. In order to get back down to those pre-pandemic levels, there's going to be about 500,000 people that will lose coverage over that course of time. We also shared last week that it was in TennCare's plan that they were going to front load those enrollees who have had the least amount of contact with TennCare. So if you see in months 1 and 2, there's 54 and 56,000 respectively. The chances are those are going to be people that haven't had much interaction with TennCare, and those are the ones that are receiving the packet early. So as you also look at this chart, the summer and fall months, we will see the highest number of packets being sent to enrollees. So when combined with the 90-day reconsideration period that I will talk about later, this summer looks to be extremely busy. And if the system gets overwhelmed, it will likely happen during the summer. So when the public health emergency was enacted, some enrollees were already in the redetermination process. Some states were preparing to terminate them, but just hadn't gotten around to sending them the notice yet. So the change when it came into this, so the policy change that CMS put out said that if they hadn't sent out that termination notice, then they needed to restart this redetermination process from the beginning. So if they were somewhere in that process, they need to restart anew. And that only makes sense if you think about it, because it's been a long time since all these people have last renewed their coverage or were subject to the renewal. And if you think about it, they might have lost their job, they might have had a new job, they might have had some changes to their household composition. So it only makes sense that they need to restart from the beginning. And that's really what this guidance says. Other considerations that we also mentioned that were in the plan, that the states must consider ways to ensure that their risk-based approach promotes continued coverage as opposed to people losing coverage, and limit the delays in making sure that that happens. So that's kind of the idea once we get this thing started back up, or at least the plan that CMS has. So states are also encouraged to consider adopting new flexibilities to streamline the eligibility enrollment process, especially for individuals who are duly eligible for Medicaid and Medicare, children, and other populations whose eligibility tends to be stable. So there's certain changes that they have done, especially looking at resources that may not change very often. And that's kind of the examples that we talked about last week for choices and for MSPs. TennCare's plan to CMS also indicated they were considering considering is the key word here, adopting early warning triggers and circuit breakers at the renewal process led to a high number of enrollees losing coverage. And for those of you who have been doing this for many years, you will recall the last big redetermination push that came when TEDS really rolled out. That about 200,000 people lost coverage, and most of them lost coverage for procedural reasons. In other words, they didn't return the packet in a timely manner, maybe didn't receive the packet at all. So TennCare is not committed to doing that, but they're considering that. So let's hope, we're really hoping at this point in time, they understand that was a problem in the past. And should a lot of people start losing coverage, that they reconsider, maybe put this whole process on pause and take a look at how they're actually really doing it. And perhaps make changes to the process so that fewer people will lose it for those reasons. So how does the state go about redetermining eligibility once a public health emergency ends? And this is the process part that I'm going to talk about today. It's going to vary a little bit from last week. So first, the states must perform an ex parte review. So remember, states are required to use information they already have in their possession. This analysis is called the ex parte review. The review is automatically processed and completed using information available to TennCare, including information from electronic data sources. So they must review eligibility for all open categories in Medicaid, not just the category that the enrollee is currently enrolled. And if determined eligible, the enrollee does not receive a redetermination packet. So basically, they're going to look at information that they have. They're going to look, for example, one of the major areas you're going to look at is going to be the current SNAP rolls. And if they have that information from maybe a prior SNAP application or information that they're on the program, if they have that information and can make that eligibility determination, they're going to go ahead and do that. And so at that point, they will renew the individual. They should notify the individual they've been renewed. But at that point, these people will no longer receive a packet, right? So they're not going to get an information packet in, from TennCare during this process. They should be automatically renewed. Now, there are some exceptions for this, and I've kind of got them listed here on the screen. Note that any type of redetermination renewal is not required for any temporary coverage that an enrollee has during a presumptive eligibility period. So if they have presumptive eligibility for breast and cervical cancer, or for pregnancy, or hospital presumptive eligibility, or emergency medical services, that is not really, it's sometimes called emergency Medicaid. It's not really emergency Medicaid. It's really more of a reimbursement mechanism for hospitals. Because that is temporary coverage and not considered full Medicaid coverage, they don't have to run through that renewal process and act once the presumptive eligibility period ends. They don't have to do that and actually screen them for all open categories. Now, this isn't so much a big deal anymore because most of presumptive eligibility is done through the TennCare Access portal. And with that, it's based on self-attestation. They get an immediate determination of eligibility. And in most cases, if they have eligibility, they're asked if they want to go ahead and submit a full application. It's really only about 5 or 6 more screens, a few more questions, and then that requirement of actually completing a full application before the end of the presumptive period is over is satisfied. And so at this point, we really don't see a whole lot of people losing their presumptive coverage because they didn't go ahead and finish submitting a full application. All right, so we're not typically seeing that, but it's just something you need to be aware of that they don't have to do, if that's the only source of eligibility is presumptive. Okay, people on SSI, that decision, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be done by the Social Security Administration, and it also covers people who are in foster care. They're not going to actually be subject to the ex parte review. So when the state cannot make a determination based on ex parte review, then renewal packet is going to be sent to them. And as an advocate, it's really important to know these deadlines, to commit them. If you need to, print it out, put it up on a bulletin or board or a wall so that you're aware of it. So they have 40 days to return the completed renewal packet, inclusive of mail time. from the date the packet is sent to the enrollee. And this can be done, they can respond by phone, in person, by mail, by fax, or they can do it also online. So 20 days is the next important deadline. Verification request will provide the enrollee with 20 days, again, inclusive of mail time, to submit information or proof that TennCare is looking for. Adverse determination, like a termination notice, will also be sent 20 days in advance of the termination date. Enrollees who fail to return the packet or respond to a verification request will have their coverage terminated. All right? And then 90 days. Individuals may submit the renewal packet or additional information requested up to 90 days after the termination of eligibility for failing to comply. Once again, it's not a review of the information that's sent to them where TennCare can say, okay, you're no longer eligible. I don't need any more information, but you're just not eligible. That is not subject to the 90-day reconsideration period. It's only for those people that didn't send in the packet initially or didn't respond to the verification request in a timely manner. And so really, this is a second chance that the enrollee has to keep their coverage. And if during that time, during the reconsideration period, they're found eligible and there happened to be a gap from the time of the original enrollment to the time they got the packet back in, this should eliminate any gap in coverage. So let's talk a little bit about the 20-day deadline. So I've kind of listed them here, and an adverse action is basically a reduction in coverage or benefits. So in other words, the enrollee will have less coverage and or services than they had before. Okay, so that's going to be an adverse action. So obviously losing TennCare coverage entirely, in other words, being terminated from the program, would be considered an adverse action. But it also could be a reduction in nursing hours. That can also be a reduction that we typically see that goes on. So that is also considered an adverse action. So really the purpose of the 20-day notice period is to give the enrollee time to appeal without really having a gap in benefits. So when you file an appeal under the plan that was submitted to CMS, once that appeal is filed, the individual should not have to request continuation of benefits, but we recommend as a best practice to always check that box on the appeal form and always ask for it specifically. Don't assume it's going to be automatically awarded. Okay, so always ask for continuation of benefits. And then the individual, the enrollee, will get to keep those benefits until an actual determination is made on that appeal. Okay, so they'll basically be able to keep their coverage until a decision is made. All right. Now there are some exceptions to the 20-day adverse action waiting period, and I've kind of listed them here. They kind of make sense if you think about it. So the verification process. So sometimes the state needs more information or proof of what the enrollee is reporting is accurate. And this process is called verification. If you help them and they have a TennCare Connect account, you'll actually be able to go in and look at the verification requests that are made. So as I mentioned, verification is the process of confirming or substantiating information provided by an individual. And it can be triggered by electronic data source or discrepancy between the information provided by the enrollee and what TennCare actually has in its possession. So if you think about this a little bit, what happens is TennCare is going to go out to the data hub and they're going to, for example, look at IRS information about income, right? And they might pre-populate, the enrollment form, but they definitely have this information. And if the enrollee fills out the packet and sends it back in and says, well, I lost my job, I know I'm no longer employed, or I lost my job, but I got a new one, but it doesn't pay as much. And so my income is different than what you have, then TennCare is going to say, okay, if it's more than 10%, again, we kind of covered that discrepancy. They're not going to make sure it matches penny for penny or dollar for dollar, but instead, if it's within an acceptable range of about 10%, they're just going to accept that and say, okay, it matches. If it's more than that, then chances are what's going to happen is they're going to send a verification request and ask, can you send us proof of your income? So that could be, payroll stubs, bank statements, anything that would show income that's coming in. It could be a letter from an employer, right? And we're going to go into a little more detail about what is acceptable proof. But if they have no income, as you can imagine, that's pretty hard to prove. Well, sometimes that could be a letter that you just send in and say, I lost my job, I'm no longer employed. The key is you want to definitely make sure that you respond within a timely manner, all right? So as I mentioned, the most common discrepancy is income, although there can be a variety of other reasons that we're going to see on the next slide. All right. So here's the information that is typically requested in the verification request that goes out. So caretaker relative status, they're really checking here to see, is a minor child still living in the home? So for a caretaker relative, that's not coverage for a child or a minor, that's rather coverage for an adult who's taking care of a child. So that rationale here is we want to make sure that, that a relative could be a parent, grandparent, aunt and uncle, for example. We want to make sure that they have health coverage and they're in good health so that they can help take care of and raise the child. That's the rationale behind that. Another thing I want to point out is health insurance information, including Medicare Parts A and B, but looking for actual coverage as well as an offer of coverage, okay? Some categories require that. Financial, this includes income and assets, which are otherwise referred to as resources. So some categories of Medicaid will have resource requirements with it. So that is another area where they can ask for additional information, though through their plan to CMS, they hope to streamline that a little bit. So hopefully we won't see as many of those as we typically would see. However, I would not assume that to happen and be prepared to start collecting that information. So a death of a household member, for example, will change a household size. So that's something else that you want to kind of be aware of. Let's talk a minute about citizenship and immigration status, because this is something else that they will tend to ask for, will send a verification for. But it's important to know that once U.S. citizenship has been verified, it will be recorded in the individual's case, and the state cannot request verification again, even if there's a break in coverage. So for example, if they have applied for coverage in the past, maybe they were an immigrant, they established that they were eligible for TennCare, maybe they fit, there were exceptions to the 5-year bar, or maybe it was beyond the 5-year bar. Then, and they got enrolled into coverage, TennCare has that information already. So let's say then they lose their coverage for maybe a year or two, and then they reapply. TennCare cannot come back to them and say, oh, we need you to prove your citizenship again, unless they have some type of information in their possession that indicates otherwise. All right. So verification immigration status is also a one-time requirement unless the individual attests to having a different type of status, or TennCare receives information indicating there's a change in status. And what they're really looking for here is there a change in the status that will affect their eligibility for the program. That's really what this is all about. Health insurance information. So as I mentioned, there are some coverage categories that are only available to people who are uninsured or don't have access to employer-based health insurance. So access does not mean being able to purchase a plan on the marketplace. So remember, we talked about if TennCare screens them for eligibility and they're not eligible for a TennCare category, let's say, for example, that they send it on to the FFM. So the fact that you might be able to go to the marketplace and purchase a plan with a subsidy attached to it, that's not what we're calling access here, and it does not count. Now, I've included the rule here in the slides that we will be distributing by noon on Friday. It lists, there's a specific list, far too many to put on a slide here, of what does and does not count as health insurance for the purpose of having access to it or having it. So it's really important that you refer to that rule, especially if you're seeing the type of insurance that you're maybe not sure about, okay? Make sure you go to the rule and check that to see what counts. Residency. So does a person have to live in Tennessee for a period of time to be considered a resident? Because residency is required for all TennCare categories. And it seems like this question comes up frequently all the time. And I'll a lot of times hear, well, you got to live in the state for 30 days. And I'm here to tell you that answer is incorrect, all right? So there is no waiting time period to establish residency. In fact, federal law prohibits states from denying Medicaid eligibility because an individual has not resided in the state for a specific period of time, right? No time requirements. Federal law prohibits that. It also prohibits denying Medicaid eligibility to an individual in an institution on the grounds that the individual did not establish residence in the state before entering the institution. We will typically see this in a situation where maybe a loved one of a family that lives in Tennessee is actually in a nursing home in another state, and now they want to move them to a nursing home in Tennessee because it'd be closer to family, right? And so this prevents TennCare from saying, no, you didn't live in the state first before going into that institution as a requirement of residence. So they can't do that. They also cannot deny or terminate a resident's Medicaid eligibility because that person's temporary absence from the state if they intend to return. So residency is all about intent. Do I intend to reside in the state of Tennessee, right? So I might have left Tennessee to go attend school in another state. It could be a child starting out in college or might be going to a specialized school. That cannot be a reason for that. They could be going to another state to receive medical treatment or residential treatment. As long as they intend to come back to the state of Tennessee, then that's a residency requirement is there. So the thing to keep in mind here is if they have some reason, excuse me, to doubt residency, then they might ask for more information about it, but just please keep that in mind. Let's talk about proof. So there are basically two types of proof, official and unofficial. And so I like to think of it this way. Official proof is most commonly provided by a business, an agency, or an organization engaged in a specific enterprise or service delivery, right? So some examples of that might be a Social Security card, right? The Social Security Administration generates this document as proof that they're enrolled in Social Security, right? A utility bill, right? So utility companies generate a bill and send it to your residence, right? They send you that bill for you to pay it. It's generated in the normal course of business. So it would be an official kind of document. It's not designed to prove residency, for example, for Medicaid. That's not the intent here, right? Car titles are known that establishes proof of ownership, deeds for property, those types of things. That's what I like to think about as official kind of proof. Unofficial can be a letter or an estimate. So this might be a letter from an employer. So an official proof of income, for example, might be, an pay stub, for example, that's generated specifically for the individual for pay. So that would be an official one. But let's say the person, needs a letter to say that they've been laid off and they can't find it or they lost a pay stub. Employer can write a letter that says this is what they got paid. It wasn't normally generated in the normal course of business, but it's unofficial and it still serves as proof. So that's something else you can use. You might have a fair market value estimate done by a real estate agent on a piece of property, appraisal, for example. That would be something that could be unofficial that could be considered. So practice tip here is you want to try to use as much official proof as possible, but if it's unavailable, don't give up. Submit unofficial proof, even if it's a handwritten letter or explanation. It's always better to provide something within the time frame than nothing at all, okay? So make sure that you submit some type of information. So let's talk about self-attestation. Why? Because because self-attestation may be easy for you to say, Rob, accepted as unofficial proof, all right? So I've listed them here. You can prove that, well, I'm pregnant, so I can self-report that. I care for a minor child in my household. We can do that. If they're claiming on their taxes, there's actually a presumption of that status that's there for that. So those are things that you want to do. Residency, again, unless they have something that indicates to the contrary, you can self-report that. The special circumstances that I've listed here, TennCare may, on a case-by-case basis and in limited circumstances, accept self-attestation for all eligibility criteria when the documentation does not exist or is not reasonably available, such as the case for individuals who are homeless or have experienced domestic violence or a natural disaster. So a tornado comes through like we had a few years ago, and people literally lost everything, including their documentation, their records, all that stuff when the tornado came through. If that happened, it's connected to a disaster, they might accept self-attestation in that particular instance. So, but it can require additional verification if there's reason to doubt what the person is self-reporting. Okay, so always keep that in mind. They can still ask for more proof. Let's talk about the reconsideration period. Enrollees have 90 days after being terminated to provide missing information or proof. It covers verification requests and are responded to in a timely manner. And there's no gap in coverage. So this can be a great way to eliminate medical debt that someone might accumulate if there happens to be a gap from the time that they were on the program and they actually get the packet or verification or proof sent back into TennCare. Easiest and fastest way is to use TennCare Connect portal to update information and establish a timeline of termination dates, okay? I always suggest it's a great idea to really have a timeline. So we talked about the 40 days to get the packet back in, 20 days for verification requests, and then 90-day reconsideration period. If you get in the habit of really kind of creating a timeline, this is when the person received the packet. It came in on April 1st. I know 40 days from April 1st, that packet needs to get submitted back in. And then I know if I get a verification request, and we recommend that you monitor those using the TennCare Connect portal, because within 24 hours, those verification requests should hit the portal. You'll know 20 days from that date of mailing, that information needs to get back in. So I can establish what is the actual deadline for that. And then if the individual gets cut off from the program, I've got 90 days. 90 days from that termination date to get that back in. So if you start to think about it, I got 40 days plus 20 to get cut off. That's in essence 60 days plus another 90. That's about 150 days that the person has to really try to keep their coverage. So really having an understanding of those deadlines is really key and important. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of having that, and also updating the information, the TennCare about their contact. All right. Now, if an enrollee happens to pay a bill that TennCare should have covered during that time frame, just keep in mind that you will need to file a medical services appeal to get reimbursed. If you need assistance with that, please reach out to us because we can help. So let's talk a little bit about special coverage based on the renewal process. Okay, so there's TennCare Standard, Transitional Medicaid, and Extended Medicaid. This is coverage for enrollees who are losing their coverage as a result of the renewal or redetermination process. And they're really created for enrollees who just missed qualifying. Their income is just too high and they kind of missed it. Let's talk about TennCare Standard. It's probably going to be the most common category you're likely to encounter, right? And it uses, keep in mind that the MAGI methodology for counting households and income. I want to point out to you here that not having insurance or access to insurance is required for TennCare Standard. And remember that the state does not consider the ability to purchase health insurance on the exchange or the marketplace as having access to insurance. What they're really looking for is access to employer-sponsored insurance is really what they're looking for. Can also get coverage for people that are over that income limit for a medical condition. This is a link to that list of conditions. Keep in mind that that is difficult to ascertain. I'm going to go into a little more detail on that in a minute. So common insurance issues, children with a non-custodial parent. If a non-custodial parent is court ordered to provide insurance but fails to do so, it does not count as having access to health insurance. If a non-custodial parent has an offer insurance but does not add the child to the policy, again, this does not count as having access to health insurance either, right? Step parents are not required to add a stepchild. This is not considered access to insurance, okay? A college student, if the school offers comprehensive health coverage, this does count as an offer of insurance or having access to it. A new job, if there's a waiting period or a limited enrollment period, it does not have access to insurance during that waiting period only. So these are common issues that you might encounter if having access to insurance pops up as a verification request. And if they're terminated for that reason, you're going to want to file an appeal. Again, we can help with that. Qualifying under the medical condition requirement. So typically, medically eligible packet must be completed and returned within 60 days. So it's a little bit longer than that, so they can gather the information. It must include collaborating verification from a physician, a mental health provider, and include medical records if required. So basically what TennCare is going to do is they're going to look at and they're going to review what the MCO has submitted, those claims that have gone in. Can they make a decision based on that? If not, then what they're going to do is send out this medical packet that must be completed, right? So the enrollee becomes medically eligible when the medical eligibility packet includes a physician's attestation, a diagnosed qualifying medical condition listed on the medical review packet, or the review unit looks at the information and the records and makes a decision at that point in time that they meet one of those qualifying conditions. This is not something that's easy to do. Chances are you're probably going to need a little bit of assistance if they're not already on it. If that's the case, please feel free to reach out to us. We can help with that. Transitional Medicaid is a holdover from the old AFDC Medicaid rules and now uses the MAGI methodology for counting households and income. The thing I want to point out here is that they're losing their coverage based on an increase in earned income. And you'll see the non-financial requirements listed here on the screen. If they do qualify, they'll have it for 12 months, and they'll typically refer to that as a transitional Medicaid certification period, all right? Again, TennCare standard, you're going to probably see more often than you're going to see for transitional. It's available to caretaker relatives. Once again, it's a very, very low number to qualify for that, and then, of course, for children. Extended Medicaid, like transitional, is a holdover for AFDC rules. Again, it uses the MAGI methodology for counting households and income. And really the changes that the IRS has done regarding the treatment of alimony and child support have really rendered this category virtually obsolete. But here it's all based on spousal support. That increase in income based on spousal support is causing them to lose their coverage. And so extended Medicaid would potentially be an option for that. So decisions and appeals. So if they're determined ineligible, again, TennCare has to provide notice to the individual. They also should provide a seamless transition to the marketplace, so the marketplace can screen them for other insurance affordability programs. In this particular instance, premium tax credits that would be available to them. And in the course of doing that, they need to provide them with very detailed contact information that they have from the individual, so that the FFM now has that and now can reach back out to them and say, hey, let's screen you for, for health insurance available through the marketplace. Appeals, anything that you got on a termination notice or reduction in benefits that doesn't look right, chances are it probably isn't. And so it's always good to file an appeal. As I mentioned previously, I highly recommend that you always check the box for continuation of benefits when you file that appeal. Don't assume they're going to give it to you, though I believe in the plan to CMS, they've kind of alluded to that. I might also do it within the first 10 days if at all possible, but please request a continuation of benefits. And so that allows the individual to keep it until TennCare can make a decision on eligibility. Let's talk about some other things that important to know about the renewal process. Presumptive eligibility, as I mentioned previously, presumptive eligibility does not meet the definition of coverage under the state plan, and hence redetermination rules do not apply to that portion of presumptive eligibility, meaning primarily don't have to screen them for other open categories of Medicaid, okay? So as I said, not typically a problem that much anymore because most of this is done online, and it's really an easy way to complete the process at that point. It's really going to apply to hospital presumptive eligibility, pregnancy, which is typically done through the health department. Those are the places that you need to be aware of, that they need to, it's really important they complete that full application so TennCare make a decision at that point. Cooperation with child support efforts. This comes up from time to time. Generally speaking, applicants and enrollees must cooperate with all child support collection efforts. There are some exceptions, especially for domestic violence, those types of things. TennCare standard does not require cooperation as a condition of eligibility. And the other thing to kind of keep in mind here, we're only talking about really an adult's eligibility, so it's not for a child. So a child shouldn't lose their coverage based on a spouse, based on a parent not going after a spouse or cooperating with child support collection efforts. Breast and cervical cancer. The redetermination process is a little more streamlined for this category of Medicaid. It requires a treatment plan as part of the process that really needs to be completed by a treating physician. The problem tends to occur when that form doesn't get matched up with the individual in their file in TennCare Connect. I would suggest as best practice to make sure that you have a copy of that. A lot of times providers will send that in on behalf of the patient, which is great. But in the past, we know we've encountered problems where there's a disconnect of TennCare Connect being able to really link that to the individual that should have it. So it's always good to make sure you have a copy of that. And if that pops up during the redetermination period, that you also submit that in. There's no penalty for submitting it more than once if that happens. So for example, if the provider did it and now you did it on your own, better safe than sorry in that particular instance. If there is any type of a problem, file an eligibility appeal. That's going to be the best way to fix that particular problem. So the main takeaway that I want you to have for today is the renewal packets and the important deadlines, okay? 40 days to return a completed renewal packet, inclusive of mail time from the date the packet is sent to the enrollee. It can be done by phone, in person, by mail, by fax, or online. 20 days for a verification request, all right? Verification request will provide the enrollee with 20 days, again, inclusive of mail time, to submit the information. An adverse determination, like a termination notice, will be sent 20 days in advance of that notice as well. And then 90 days, individual may resubmit a renewal packet or additional information requested. If they fail to do so, up to 90 days after the termination of eligibility. Again, I highly recommend that you make a timeline for anybody that you're helping so that you make sure you don't miss any of these deadlines. Other things, referrals and partnering. As we mentioned on the first webinar that we've done, you can make referrals to the TJC. We can help get people, help them complete the renewal packet, help them with appeals if need be, or even help them apply. So 3 ways to do it. You can complete the online form on our website. You can call this 877 number, or you can email our casework supervisor, Diana Gallagher. If you're trying to figure out how can I best plug in, how do I volunteer, how do I get help with a specific question we have? Do we need to send a letter to our existing patient base, for example, or our constituents? Are there materials that we have at the TJC that can be shared? The best thing to do there is reach out to Shana Watkins, and she will be glad to connect with you and see how we can help. Right. So these are the ways that you can connect with us. again, we'll be sharing the slide deck by noon on Friday. Another way to do it is to stay informed is to complete, this form that we have available. Again, it's one that was available from the first presentation. Ask a series of questions. How can we best help you with the process? What are you interested in doing? Are you interested in volunteering? Do you need some help? Is your organization interested in helping people keep their coverage but don't know where to start? This is a great form to fill out and just really kind of helps us think about how we're going to do things going forward and keep people connected. Because again, this is a marathon, not a sprint. It's been going on over the course of 12 months, and we're just getting started with it. So we really don't know what to expect. There's also an option here to be part of a periodic call that we're going to establish. Again, how frequent we have those calls will really be dependent on what's going on during the process. There'll be a chance for you to ask us questions. It's a chance to share information that you have received from your part of the state and connect with other advocates. So I highly recommend that you go to the form and fill it out if you haven't done so already. So with that said, we're going to move to the question and answer portion of the session. And I'll take a look at some of these and we'll get started with them. So one of the questions that we have is how do you get certified to sign up citizens for TennCare? Well, you don't need to be certified to do that. However, if you want to help people enroll on the marketplace, then you do. So you either need to be a navigator or a certified application counselor. That is something that we can see about posting on our website about how to do that. I know Family and Children's Services, for example, has a federal navigator grant here for most of Tennessee, if not the entire state. They would have information there as well as how you might be able to do that. Otherwise, federal rules are quite specific. Anybody can help anyone apply for Medicaid, okay? Once again, it's not picking a plan on the marketplace and that type of thing. This is rather just for applying for Medicaid, which is completely different. So you can help somebody using TennCare Connect, for example, all right? You can also go to a hearing with them. You can file an appeal for them. Anybody can help. It can be a family member. It can be an advocacy organization like us. Anybody can help anyone. As I like to tell people, when it comes to a hearing or something like that, and you want to go help somebody, here's your chance to play a lawyer and not get penalized for it. It's not the unauthorized practice of law as long as you're helping somebody apply for Medicaid, okay? Next question. If we know they're going to ask for something in verification, should we send it along with the packet or wait until the request is made? That's a great question. I'm normally pretty proactive in doing things, but I'm not quite sure how this is going to work or how it's going to really be processed. So in a certain way, I would almost probably wait to see if they actually ask for it before I would send it in. Why kind of borrow trouble? With that said, I think it's a good idea or best practice to say to the to the enrollee that you're helping, chances are they're going to ask about this. So let's start collecting this information now before they send you a request. It only gives you about 20 days to complete it, right? So this would be very, very helpful for anything having to do with a resource requirement or tracking down pay stubs from a prior employer. If you think that's going to be a case or something that's going to be an issue, start looking for it now. Best case scenario, they don't ask for it, okay? But at this point, I'm not quite sure I would just automatically volunteer it because I don't know how the system's going to work and they might sail right on through. So, but it's always good to have it so you're ready to respond if they ask for it. It says, why does TennCare ask for citizen immigration status for undocumented? I have seen this for EMA applications. Well, keep in mind, generally, when you're applying for Medicaid, now leaving a little bit out the emergency medical reimbursement, okay, but it is really looking to screen people for all open categories of Medicaid. So that's why it's going to ask. And the way the algorithm is set up, the way that the questions are aligned on TennCare Connect or in the packets, it's really kind of asking you basic questions. Residency is always going to be a requirement, but you know, specifically undocumented pregnant women, they don't have to prove immigration status or citizenship to be eligible for that. A lot of times when we submit an application for that initial application, we'll send a letter along with it that says we're only applying for covered kids, and that's the only category we want considered. And because we're not required to prove citizenship at that point, we're not providing it. And usually TennCare will accept it. Whenever you do that, I highly recommend that you submit all the information needed to establish eligibility, in other words, income, things of that nature, proof of pregnancy, so that they can make a decision right then and there based on the information that they have, okay? The medical, you know, emergency medical services, that reimbursement, but that's a good question. Again, I think once they're looking for, are they eligible for Medicaid? Again, you can always put kind of a cover letter, especially when you want to restrict the number of categories of what you're looking for coverage. For a particular instance, you could put a cover letter on it to try to get around. I don't think that's going to stop it entirely, but it might. Will applying for TennCare affect immigrants' ability to gain citizenship? I do not believe so. I'm not an immigration attorney. That's not something that the TJC does, but I don't believe it's going to affect their ability on that. But I would defer to someone that really does a lot of work in this area. Since the last presentation, has anything further been clarified with how ECF Choices fits into this? The goal of the program a lot of times is to be employed, and that may be offered insurance. You know, if they take insurance from an employer, they would lose their TennCare, which would then make them ineligible for continuing the ECF Choices program. Again, good questions. I don't think we know exactly how this is going to roll out. I would say this though, if you have some issues or you're concerned about it, this would be a great way to partner with the TJC. Let us help you with some of those, and let's monitor it and see what's happening. And then again, if we see something that's posted out there on the TennCare website, or if you receive something or another advocate on the call does, this is another great situation to join, a great reason to join those periodic calls where we can share this information about what people are seeing. Rest assured, as we know more about the process, the problems that everybody's going to be encountering, we will have subsequent webinars to address that as well. So as those tend to emerge, we will address those accordingly. If a child lives in Tennessee with relatives with power of attorney, can the adult apply for coverage for the children? Will they use the adult's power of attorney income, or would they use the custodian's income? Well, again, anybody can help them apply. The power of attorney is fine. They can help them apply for that. I would always include the power of attorney when you upload the documents as establishing proof of that. As far as what income counts, it really boils down to the methodology being used to count households and income. So we really need a lot more information to make that determination, because there's MAGI categories, which are all based on tax filing unit, okay? And there's a lot of rules around that to determine who is actually in the Medicaid household. And keep in mind, Medicaid eligibility is an individual determination, not a family determination. So it is theoretical, and we have definitely seen it. You can have a family of 4, and every member of the family have a different household size for Medicaid eligibility purposes. Only the people's income, the countable income of the people that are in that household count. All right. So that's the important thing there. Once again, depends on the methodology for how it's counted. In other words, is it information or income that's going to be counted, or is it going to be excluded? And then who is actually in the household? So we need more information. If you have a specific instance where you're running into problems, again, a perfect situation, reach out to us to see if we can help out. What documents, if any, still require a notary? Again, good question. I don't know a whole lot of them will. I think that's really going to be more about establishing ownership. I'm not seeing, to my knowledge, a specific requirement of actually having a notary, though. I would probably tend to see that more where there's a property interest or something that typically establishes proof of ownership. Okay. But that's a good question. That's something, if you're running into that problem, again, a great reason to kind of reach out to us. Can a parent that is taking care of his daughter get TennCare even if he has been cut off because of being $75 over the income limit? Maybe. Once again, we're going to want to look at the federal poverty limits, which I was talking with Jane Beasley, our senior client advocate here at the TJC this morning about it. According to TennCare, those new FPLs are going to go into effect April 1. Okay, so that's one. Two, there are coverage categories for people that might be losing their coverage. So we're talking about extended and transitional Medicaid that might apply in this particular situation. So it just depends. That's a situation where you might want to reach out to us, because at $75, are we actually counting income that should be counted? Do we have the household correct? This might be worth taking a second look at to see. I always recommend, whenever they're close, to always apply or renew their coverage, even if it looks like they may not be, because again, it's only countable income. Just because they receive income doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be counted. We go into a lot of this when we do our Medicaid eligibility boot camp every October. We always do a lot of subsequent trainings on that. If you haven't attended one of those, this might be something you might want to consider in the future. It says a lot of parents do not realize that their employer's insurance may offer medical coverage beyond age 26, basically coverage as long as the parent has employer insurance for an adult with chronic medical condition. How will that be addressed if they currently have TennCare? Well, again, the renewal process, it's really going to depend on the specific situations for the individual. And that might be something you want to reach out to us for. Again, during the redetermination process, they need to screen for all open categories of eligibility. Okay, so, for example, does this person have an eligibility determination of disability from the Social Security Administration, right? That's going to be something we're going to want to kind of look at. Is there a disabled adult child, and that might factor into, does this person need choices, would they qualify for that? And that's another one. Would the person potentially be pregnant? There might be coverage for that. So there's a lot that goes really into that, and we really need to have more information. Again, if something doesn't look right, file an appeal. You can always file an appeal. You can always withdraw it later, but file it within the deadline. Reach back out to us. We can see if we can help you with it. Is the appeal within 10 days a hard deadline for continuation of benefits? You stated, if at all possible, file within 10 days, implied wiggle room. Well, that is what was listed in the plan to CMS, that if there was an appeal filed during the, during redetermination period, within that 20 days of losing their coverage, that they would have continuation of benefits. I'm just saying I would file it within 10 days, because I believe that is how the rules still state that, unless they've gone in and made an amendment to those recently. But I would definitely file it within 10 if you can. If it's still within that 20-day period, I'd still file the appeal. We could always argue that later as a point we can bring up to TennCare if need be on appeal. So it's a little bit of a gray area, but once again, that's something we can probably try to help you out with. So I understood from earlier comments that the state will give 20 days advance notice of termination, and an appeal can be filed during that time with continuation of benefits, but there is a period of 90 days to file for reconsideration. Can you explain the difference between these situations? Does the 90-day reconsideration apply only in cases where proposed termination is due to failure of the enrollee to submit the packet? And that is correct. All right. So it's when not only they didn't submit the packet, maybe they submitted the packet but got a verification request and didn't meet that timeline. It's basically for not providing information or proof. That's the 90-day reconsideration period that's going to go on. So if you received the termination notice, it says, well, we reviewed your information and we've determined that you're no longer eligible for that reason, then that's something when you'd want to file an appeal at that point. If it says you're being terminated because you didn't respond in a timely manner, that's when the 90 days kicks in. Now, you could probably do both if you really wanted to, as far as if it failed to send in the packet, that type of thing. I don't see it as so much on this end because we don't deal as much in the payment so much as we do for coverage. Though it's my understanding in talking with some healthcare providers that it's a little bit easier if they're, if any prior authorization that they may have gets renewed as opposed to starting over. It just eliminates that paperwork a little bit and maybe makes that situation a little bit easier to do. Again, I don't have first-hand knowledge of that, but this would be a good question, for example, to raise in one of our advocate meetings. And if there are some providers on the call that can kind of share their experience with that. I don't think we're going to know a lot about this till we get into the process and really kind of see what's happening. So for the breast and cervical cancer, what happens if the physician doesn't complete the form? Well, if the form's not submitted in, then they're going to get terminated. Okay, so that's what's going to happen there. File an appeal when to get that in. It's really important for the cancer patients, especially part of that breast and cervical cancer. You really want to monitor those. A lot of times that's an appeal that can be done to send back in. Once again, we can submit that information and make an argument for that. It'd be real interesting to see if that missing information would qualify within the 90-day reconsideration period. But best practice is to really stay on top of it for your cancer patients. So there's a required treatment plan for requires doctor's signature for breast and cervical cancer, a form or freehand letter from the physician. If a form, can you obtain this form online? Yeah, that's a form that they complete. It's filled out. And I believe that that whole process, at least prior to the public health emergency, was pretty streamlined and was made a little bit easier. We can see if we can track down the form and then make that available on our website for download. Next one says, I'm a bit confused about the access to insurance question. I understand the ACA access to insurance ramifications. Can you remind me how this question affects TennCare, and is there a difference with covered kids? What happens when you say the client does have access? Are they ineligible for coverage? What data sources does TennCare for accessing this? That is correct. They're going to be looking for access to insurance. So if they believe there is most common way is going to be employer access to insurance, that will prevent them from qualifying, even if they're under the income level, right? So the important thing there is it depends on the category of eligibility that you're looking at. And you may not necessarily recognize it or know it during the renewal process because it's not going to come right out and say that, okay? But again, what I would do here, I would look at what type of insurance do they have. I would look at the rule that I provided the link to. Does it fit within one of those? If you still have questions about it, let us know. If they get terminated or from coverage, again, they're screening for all open categories of Medicaid, right? So when they tell you you're not eligible, they're not going to say, oh, we screened you for covered kids and you're not eligible. They're just going to say you're not eligible. You might need to file an appeal at that particular point in time and raise the issue of access if it falls into one of those areas that exist. So, it really kind of depends on the individual situation. It depends on the type of insurance that they have. It depends on what they might be categorically eligible for. There's a lot of pathways to coverage. So that might be a situation you reach out to us for some help, some technical assistance, or if need be, even refer the case to us and we'll handle it. Any of the referrals or reaching out to us for help, that's all being done free of charge. There's no cost to you or to the client for the information that we provide. For redetermination for choices groups 1 through 3, LTS will or PAE be required as part of the redetermination process? Again, I'm not extremely sure on this particular instance. Let me get with people that do this in our office, a little more knowledgeable about it than I am. I do not believe so, but that could definitely be a situation. I think it's primarily going to be looking at people's income resources primarily, especially if they're in a group 1 situation where they're actually in a nursing home. But I suppose that could be a situation that could pop up. But let me check, and we'll get back to you on that one as well, as far as what you're likely to see. Can a person who's adult caregiver get coverage for taking care of a loved one with a disability get Medicaid? So once again, you have to look at the specific categories of eligibility and the requirements for those to see if there's coverage, right? So again, caretaker relative, they might be caring for someone who is disabled in their household, but they might also have income that's low enough and they're caring for a perfectly healthy child that's under the age of 18 or a minor. So, I mean, that's how they would qualify, for example, but maybe the person is disabled that they're really taking care of in this particular instance or needs most of their attention doesn't fit into that category. So it really kind of depends on the individual situation. Caretaker relative is difficult. It's primarily difficult because the income levels are extremely low, right? It's very, very hard to qualify from an income standpoint if someone works. But this, again, is a situation where reach out to us and we'll look for ways that how they might be eligible. It might be something we're not even considering. But I wouldn't just lock in solely on caretaker relative. It's really designed for caring for a minor child. Can people with renal failure get TennCare? So most of the time, when you look at those specific categories of eligibility, it's going to be, do they fit categorically and financially into most categories? And that's really going to be kind of the key. So is there household composition? Is there household income? And their situation fit into that? Will they qualify for disability, for example? Might they be able to go on to Medicare if they do have that designation from the Social Security Administration? And I believe, again, I'm not an expert on Social Security disability, but I believe renal failure might be a way to expedite a way to getting that designation from SSA quicker. We also know that some of those people might qualify for SSI, and if they do, that's going to be an automatic enrollment into TennCare. If not, and it's SSDI, after 2 years of being eligible or receiving payment for SSDI, they should become Medicare eligible. Might they qualify for a Medicare savings program and then have little out-of-pocket or no out-of-pocket expenses associated with it? Again, it's going to boil down to the specific situation. Is a renal failure bad enough that maybe they qualify for choices? These type of situations, it's really kind of looking at the particular situation. What are the available categories? What is the income? What are the resources that they apply? How might we get this individual eligible? And we've got some really good, sharp people here that can help navigate that, think about that, and come up with ways of getting people covered. So that's one that you want to reach out to us and get some help with. So folks, we've gone quite a bit over time. I appreciate everybody who stuck around on the call. I hope I answered most of those questions for you. Again, please feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. And also reach out to Shana. Once again, we're going to distribute the slides to everyone. I also want to point out that we will continue to do trainings. Our next upcoming training or webinar will be on March 22nd, again, another Wednesday. And this is really how to spot issues and ask for help. How can you get help if you have clients or you encounter people with that? This training, although would be I think a refresher is always helpful for anybody that does work in this area. I don't think you can ever hear the information about it too often, but this is really about how to spot issues. It's really designed for people that maybe I don't help people enroll all that often, or maybe I don't help them at all. But if I encounter people in my constituency, maybe it's an after-school program, or maybe I'm a social worker in an elementary school, what are the things that I can spot that might say, hey, there might be coverage for this individual, or they might be going through the redetermination period, or what information should I provide to them? And how can I refer them to an organization like the TJC for help? All right, so we're going to talk a lot about that in our next webinar. So if it doesn't fit maybe for you, your knowledge level, please feel free to share it with others. Again, it's available on our website. It's available here just to click the register and distribute the slides. You can go and register for that training as well. You can also link to our on-demand training and learning hub that we have. That's where we're going to upload and have upload, for example, that first webinar we talked about collaboration with the TJC. We'll put this one up there as well. Please give us a couple of days to do so before we get that up on the website. We will also provide a link for it. You can go and watch that. You can refer that to your colleagues to come and watch. You'll also find a variety of other trainings on our portal as well, stuff, for example, for nutrition, things of that nature. So a lot of information there, a lot of training is there that you can access. And then again, you want to always monitor your email, because we will be sending out information about future webinars that we will create. And maybe we don't know about right now. It's when we get into the process, we know what the problems are. If there's a big problem that's bobbing up and we've got to work around for it, rest assured we want to share it with as many people as possible, because our goal here is to keep as many people enrolled on the program that are eligible for it as possible, right? That's really our goal, the mission of what we want to do here at the TJC, is we want to help people keep their coverage if they're eligible for it, right? So with that said, thanks everybody for attending today's webinar. We really appreciate your willingness to help people keep their coverage. Your assistance is needed. As we mentioned before, even if all the TennCare side works perfectly, we know from past experience that all these enrollees are going to need your help. You're going to need everybody's help. So the more you can help out, the better off everyone's going to be. So thanks, folks, and have a great day.